Your hands won't stop sweating. Social interactions and emotions can make it worse. Stress can make it worse. But you know very well that these are not the root cause. Because when you're alone by yourself in your room at a cool temperature, your hands are still sweating profusely. This is hyperhidrosis. And for years, I thought I was just unlucky to have this condition. But after years of research in neurology, genetics, and biochemistry, I found the origin of hyperhidrosis. And it turns out hyperhidrosis isn't random. It starts in your nerves, and for many of us, in our genes. Today, I show you the underlying mechanism and the real cause of hyperhidrosis, and the path to a cure. Short disclaimer, this is not medical advice. This is for research purposes only. And second disclaimer, what I am going to describe here in this video applies to the large majority of people with hyperhidrosis, but not all of them. There are different causes behind hyperhidrosis. The causes that I will discuss applies to roughly 80% of people with hyperhidrosis, from my estimation. If your hyperhidrosis also comes with visceral anxiety, which I also call a high sympathetic tone, you are likely to suffer from hyperhidrosis because of what I describe here. But only genetic sequencing can bring 100% certainty. Current hyperhidrosis treatments try to block the sweat. Anticholinergics, antipersistents, iontophoresis, Botox, oral drugs, even nerve surgery. They can help, but they never touch the root cause. So symptoms always come back. Why do some people sweat far too much, feel anxiety much more easily, have chest tightness, bladder urgency, or gut cramps, even when everything looks normal on medical tests? I'm here to tell you that all of these symptoms are interrelated, and they all have in common one particular origin, which is the root cause of hyperhidrosis. And I'm going to give it to you straight. This root cause is a specific protein in your nerve cells, specifically an ion channel called NAV 1.7, which is a specific type of sodium channel, which happens to be overactive in most hyperhidrosis patients. We are going to start by looking at the physiology of your nervous system, and then we'll look at this specific ion channel, NAV 1.7, and how a gain-of-function mutation of this channel makes it hyperactive and results in all of the symptoms I described, from hyperhidrosis to potentially, but not always, anxiety, bad digestion, gut cramps, urinary urgency, shortness of breath, and many others. Let's dive in. So before we get to the important part, I need to start with a quick introduction on the basics. So let's start with the basic neuroscience physiology of nerve firings. Nerves communicate using electricity. A nerve fiber is like a wire. Along its surface are ion channels, protein gates that let charged particles like sodium, potassium, and calcium flow in and out. The most important channels for a nerve cell firing are sodium channels. When enough sodium rushes in, the nerve fires an action potential. That's an electrical signal that runs down the fiber and tells the next cell what to do. Normally, these sodium channels open only when there is a strong enough stimulus. But if the channel is mutated with a gain-of-function mutation, then the threshold for firing drops. The nerve fires too easily, and the result is that nerves that should be calm and constantly or become constantly overexcitable and overexcited. So now let's look at your autonomic nervous system, which has two components. The first one is the sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight accelerator, pushing your heart rate, blood pressure, and sweating up when it thinks you're in danger. And then the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the brake, calming everything down, slowing your heart, helping you digest, and keeping your body in balance. Now, remember that ion channel mutation I told you about just before. When this happens in your autonomic nervous system, the system that controls sweating, blood vessels, gut, bladder, etc., the balance shifts towards constant sympathetic activation, the fight or flight mode, and so your body lives as if it's under attack. Sweating, racing heart, poor digestion, restless nerves, and over time, this causes exhaustion. So during my research, for a very long time, I thought that the NAV 1.7 gain of function mutation would only result in a more active sympathetic nervous system. But it is in fact more complex than that. There are specific instances where the parasympathetic function can be too strong as well. But still, if you need to keep one thing in mind, which is 80% true, it is that a genetic gain of function mutation on NAV 1.7 results in an overactive sympathetic nervous system, which causes excessive sweating and visceral anxiety for no reasons. This is the summary of the root cause of most hyperhidrosis cases. Again, this is not something coming from your brain, nor is it psychological. Although it can be influenced by emotions and social interactions, the root cause is peripheral, in your peripheral sympathetic nervous system. Okay, now the juicy part. We are going to look at all the places where the NAV 1.7 protein is expressed in the human body. NAV 1.7 is encoded by the CN9A gene, and it is one of the most important sodium channels in the human body, but it is not expressed on every nerve cells. So where do we find it? And this question is extremely important because when you ask where do we find this protein, you will get the answer as to all the potential symptoms that are possible with a mutation on that channel. We are going to get very specific, but more broadly, NAV 1.7 can be found on postganglionic sympathetic fibers. These are the final wires that tell sweat glands and blood vessels what to do. Visceral sensory afferent fibers, these are the nerves from the bladder, the gut, airways, carotid body, and skin going to the brain. They can also be found in parasympathetic airway fibers and enteric neurons, and finally in olfactory sensory neurons. And importantly, NAV 1.7 is not in your brain cortex or spinal motor neurons. It's mostly in the peripheral nervous system, especially in autonomic and sensory fibers. That's why the symptoms are so specific. So keep in mind, NAV 1.7 is mostly on sympathetic nerves, but it can also be found in some precise locations on parasympathetic fibers. That's why the symptoms are localized and non-specific. And that's also why I like to call the condition a form of dysautonomia. So this is a form of dysautonomia, which includes hyperhidrosis, anxiety, digestive issues as its main symptoms. So now let's look at this more closely, step by step, organ by organ. Where exactly is NAV 1.7 expressed in the human body? And then what symptoms are going to result from this specific location? So if you have hyperhidrosis, you want to be extremely careful here and ask yourself whether you have some of these symptoms. You might not have all of them, but you might have some of them. And the more you have, the more likely it is that your hyperhidrosis is caused by an NAV 1.7 mutation. Although the only way to know for sure is to get a genetic sequencing test. So number one, NAV 1.7 is on sweat glands, innervated by sympathetic afferent fibers. When NAV 1.7 is overactive in postganglionic sympathetic fibers to the sweat glands, the fibers fire even without brain orders. The result is palmar, plantar, axillary hyperhidrosis. This is sweat pouring during calm situations, exams, meetings, handshakes, whatever. This is the classic visible symptom of NAV 1.7 overactivity. Second, blood vessels. Again, sympathetic afferent fibers. Some sympathetic fibers with NAV 1.7 control, skin blood vessels. With a gain of function mutation, baseline constriction is going to be exaggerated. So hands and feet can turn cold, purple, or even red. Sometimes you get burning pain or reactive flushing. This can happen in the face too. It's another direct afferent effect. The wire to your blood vessels is firing too much. Next, we have another important one, the gut and enteric system. The gut has both sensory and enteric neurons with NAV 1.7. Overactivation here means stomach cramps that resemble very closely to IBS-like cramps. And due to parasympathetic tone being the highest at night, you will feel those in the end of the night just before you wake up, if you do indeed feel them. The nerves amplify reflexes and send exaggerated pain signals upward. So the brain thinks that the gut is in distress when it isn't. And this can also cause an increase in nausea and nauseous sensations. And another result of this is an overall increased sensitivity in the gut to gluten, for example. Then we have airway parasympathetic afferent fibers and vagal afferent fibers. So in the lungs, parasympathetic neurons that constrict your airways rely on NAV 1.7. If hyperactive, they cause wheeze, tight chest, excess mucus production, which will result in congested airways or a congested nose. Meanwhile, vagal sensory afferents with NAV 1.7 bombard your brainstem with false alarms, making you feel air hunger or shortness of breath, even when oxygen is normal. So you might never feel this, but trust me, if you run or play any kind of sports, like football in my case, you will feel this. You won't be able to breathe and you will gas out very rapidly on the pitch, especially under stressful situations. Then we have the bladder. These are visceral afferent fibers that are parasympathetic. In the bladder, stretch fibers use NAV 1.7. Normally, they fire when the bladder is full. But with a mutation, they fire early. So your brain thinks the bladder is full too soon, and the result is urinary urgency, and even sometimes pain. It's not that your bladder is misbuilt, the wires are misfiring, and this is what results in the urinary urgency that you can feel. Then we have the somatic sensory nerves in the dorsal root ganglion or the trigeminal nerve. So this is the main reason why NAV 1.7 is investigated by pharma companies. It is for its role in pain. So the mutation here might result in increased pain sensitivity and in particular burning pain in the hands. These are erythromelalgia type red flares where your hands can become extremely painful after being cold for too long when they get warm again. And although this is more rare, in the trigeminal nerves of the face, it can mean facial pain or neuralgia-like attacks. So these are the main ones. There are a few other locations, but these are really the main ones for NAV 1.7. Now, an important information to have in mind is that this peripheral aspect of the condition is what creates a vicious loop where you are going to have afferent overactivity like sweat, vasoconstriction, visceral anxiety, tight chest, that are all caused by the peripheral nervous system. This is going to create afferent noise, which is basically a false alarm going up to the brain. That's going to give signals of pain, suffocation, anxiety. And so the hypothalamus in your brain stays on red alert. The sympathetic system stays on, and adrenaline starts flooding. You're going to feel jittery, restless, anxious, unable to rest. And it's a loop. Basically, the loop goes afferent signal, becomes an afferent signal, creates brain panic, which creates, again, more afferent signal. So that's why hyperhidrosis rarely exists alone. And it usually comes with anxiety, chest tightness, gastrointestinal, and bladder problems. It is all connected where NAV 1.7 is located. And this loop is what makes it so that the symptoms usually get worse with time, unfortunately, especially if you go through stressful events like a viral infection or any other health issue, surgery, etc. So to conclude, and as a reminder as well, NAV 1.7 is mostly on sympathetic nerves, but it is also found in some precise locations on parasympathetic fibers. That's why the symptoms are localized and non-specific. And this very fact makes a treatment for an NAV 1.7 mutation very difficult. because basically you cannot compensate for the strong sympathetic drive by overactivating the parasympathetic nervous system systemically, because you will get overcompensation of the parasympathetic nervous system symptoms. And although you will reduce your sweating, you will get crazy gut cramps and urinary urgency and shortness of breath all the time. So the only way to approach this is very clear to me. We need to focus on NAV 1.7 directly. But it turns out NAV 1.7 is not a new target in the pharma industry. It's a very well-known target for its role in pain. And unfortunately for us, it is also a target that is very difficult to drug for multiple reasons that we can discuss in future video. So what do I believe in? What am I working on? Well, I only believe in a curative approach. A curative approach that goes straight to the source of the issue. I don't think parasympathetic activation will save us. I don't think a small molecule will save us. I think that only a targeted gene therapy against NAV 1.7 represents a real cure for hyperhidrosis. And that's what I'm currently working on. So when you look at hyperhidrosis, it isn't just sweat. It's the visible tip of a much deeper dysautonomia. NAV 1.7 is the key, and wherever it's expressed, the function becomes too loud. Sweating, vasoconstriction, anxiety, etc. So the moment you see this, everything fits. The symptoms aren't random anymore. They become the direct consequence of nerves firing too frequently. So I hope this was helpful. Maybe you recognize yourself in these symptoms. If this is the case, rest assured, new therapeutic options will arrive for you in the next decade. This will take time, as does any serious biomedical research project, but solutions are coming. And these solutions will be curative, not just addressing the superficial symptoms. If you recognize yourself in these symptoms, the key next step is to confirm your genetic mutation. I've already gave you the gene encoding NAV 1.7. It's called SCN9A. This is what you have to look. The only thing to have in mind is that this is all unpublished research. It is unpublished in the scientific literature and even less so in the medical textbooks. So your genetic test report is very likely not going to detect your NAV 1.7 mutation. More likely, what it will do is flag your mutation variants as benign or non-pathogenic because the database does not contain this mutation yet. So if you have any questions, let me know in the comments and I will see you in the next one.